The next time you get sick, you will do something so automatic you won't even notice you're doing it. You will reach for a small plastic bottle. Inside it will be a white pill, engineered in a laboratory, manufactured in a factory, shipped across an ocean, and sold to you for pocket change. Your pain will fade in about 20 minutes, and you will never once think about the fact that for almost the entire history of our species, there was no bottle, there was no pill, there was no doctor. There was just you, the people around you, and time. So what did they actually do? The answer is far stranger and far more human than you would ever expect. Let's start with a body found in a cave. In 1957, in the mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan, an American archaeologist named Ralph Selecki was excavating a place called Shanidar Cave. Inside, he found the remains of a Neanderthal man who had died roughly 50,000 years ago. Scientists call him Shanidar 1, and when they examined his skeleton, they found a catalog of catastrophe. When he was young, something struck him hard across the left side of the face. The blow damaged his eye socket, and he was probably left blind in that eye. His right arm was withered and useless, and at some point below the elbow, it was gone entirely, either torn away or amputated. He walked with a severe limp. One of the bones in his right foot had been broken and had healed badly. His spine was riddled with a degenerative condition that would have left him stiff and in constant pain. And in 2017, researchers examining his skull found something nobody had noticed before. Bony growths had almost completely sealed his ear canal shut. This man was, for all practical purposes, deaf. Now think carefully about what that means. He was half blind. He was deaf. He had one arm. He could barely walk. He lived on an open landscape crawling with hyenas and leopards in an ice age, hunting large animals with stone tools. He could not have heard a predator behind him. He could not have run. He could not have fought. By every logic of the natural world, this man should have died within days of his first injury. He lived into his 40s. For a Neanderthal, that was old. He didn't just survive his injuries, he survived them for decades. And there was only one explanation. Every single one of those injuries shows signs of healing, which means that for weeks, for months, for years, somebody fed him, somebody protected him, somebody kept him warm and moved at his pace, and stayed beside a man who could contribute almost nothing to the group. Somebody chose to keep him alive.
There is a famous story about this idea. As it's usually told, the anthropologist Margaret Mead was once asked by a student what she considered the first sign of civilization. The student expected her to say a tool, or a pot, or a weapon. Instead, she supposedly held up a human thigh bone that had been broken and had healed, and explained that in the wild, a broken leg is a death sentence. You cannot run, you cannot hunt, you cannot reach water. You become food. A healed thigh bone means that someone stayed with you, someone carried you, someone brought you food while you could do nothing at all. Compassion, she said, is where civilization begins. Here is the thing. Nobody has ever been able to find that quote. It traces back to a single book published in 2012, decades after Mead's death, with no time, no place, and no source. It is probably not something she ever actually said. But the strange part is that the archaeology says it anyway. Because the caves and the graves are full of healed bones. They are full of people who should have died and didn't. The story might be invented. The evidence is not. So what was the medicine? In a cave in northern Spain called El Cedrón, scientists did something remarkable. They took the hardened plaque off the teeth of Neanderthals who died around 50,000 years ago, and they sequenced the DNA trapped inside it. Plaque is a trap. It catches food, bacteria, pollen, everything that passed through the mouth, and then it fossilizes, and it holds all of it for tens of thousands of years. And in one individual, they found a story. His jaw showed a dental abscess. If you have ever had one, you know that the pain is unbelievable. On top of that, his plaque contained the DNA of an intestinal parasite that causes severe diarrhea. This man was, in the researchers' words, quite sick. and in his plaque they found two more things. The first was poplar. Poplar bark contains salicylic acid. It is the active ingredient in aspirin. The second was a mold called penicillium. It is where we got penicillin. Sit with that for a second. More than 40,000 years before a scientist in a London laboratory noticed mold-killing bacteria in a petri dish, a sick Neanderthal with an abscessed tooth was chewing on the two things we would eventually turn into our painkiller and our antibiotic. He almost certainly did not know why they worked. He did not know about salicylic acid. He had no theory of infection. But he knew somehow that the bark helped. And somebody, at some point, had figured that out and passed it on. That is what ancient medicine actually was. Not magic, not superstition. It was an enormous inheritance of trial and error, accumulated across thousands of generations, held entirely inside human memory, and handed down by people who could not write a word of it. Every plant that worked was remembered. Every plant that killed was remembered too. The knowledge lived in the old, which is exactly why the old were kept alive. But we should be honest about what this care actually looked like, because it was not gentle.
There was no anesthetic. A wound was cleaned with whatever was at hand and closed with whatever would hold. A broken bone was set by force, by people who had done it before, while the person screamed. Infections that we now cure in a week with a $5 prescription were, for them, a coin flip. Childbirth killed. Teeth killed. A cut on a hand could kill. And the sick person was not moved to a separate building, out of sight, tended by strangers in uniforms. There was no such place. They stayed exactly where they were, in the middle of everyone, and the entire group watched every hour of it. The children watched. The recovery, or the dying, happened in the open. And when the care failed, as it so often did, something else happened. In that same cave in Iraq, Selecki found another Neanderthal body, and in the soil around it, dense clumps of ancient pollen. His interpretation was that this man had been laid to rest on a bed of wildflowers, and for decades it was one of the most famous images in all of archaeology. Researchers have argued about it ever since. The pollen may have been carried in by burrowing rodents. It may mean nothing at all. But the argument itself tells you something. We are still standing over a 50,000-year-old grave, desperate to know whether somebody brought him flowers. And that is the part we don't talk about. Because we did not just invent better medicine. We invented distance. We took the sick and the dying and we moved them somewhere else. We handed them to professionals. And we did it for good reasons. And it saved an unimaginable number of lives, including probably yours. But it also meant that for the first time in 300,000 years, being cared for became a service instead of a bond. The people who keep you alive today were people you pay. The people who kept Shanidar 1 alive were people who knew him. We are the first humans in history who can survive almost anything alone. And we are the first humans in history who mostly do. So here is what actually happened when ancient humans got sick. They chewed bark that quietly worked. They set bones by hand and hoped. They carried the ones who could not walk. And when a man went blind, and then deaf, and then lost an arm, and could no longer hunt or fight, or hear a predator coming, they did not leave him behind. They kept him for decades. We have better medicine than they could have dreamed of. We have machines that see inside the body and drugs that kill things they could not imagine. Almost none of us will die the way they died. But somewhere between that cave and this century, we stopped being the ones who carry each other. We handed it to somebody else. And the thing we replaced was never the medicine. It was the state.